Obviously, Joe Biden was already in decline there, and they told you, you're crazy. If you even question that, you're crazy. The same people who said you're crazy for 4 years, if you question any level of senility with Joe Biden, now are saying you're crazy. I mean, you're just factually wrong if you say that Kamala was in charge of the border. Kamala Harris has had the ultimate glow up in the last couple of weeks. Ever since Joe Biden stood down, there was a big question of what's going to happen. Is there going to be kind of an open primary? And as we have seen, Joe Biden endorsed her, Pelosi endorsed her, eventually Barack Obama, Bill and Hillary Clinton. All of the powerful elites in the Democratic Party, they came behind Kamala Harris, put their endorsement behind her. She snatched up the delegates. She is going to be facing off with Donald Trump. They'll make it official soon, and then they will have the DNC where they kind of coronate her as the new person who is running. Now, people have all kinds of opinions about this. It was the Biden-Harris ticket. It seems natural for her to be running. At the same time, I at least understand a lot of the just frustration on the right side where they're saying, look, you guys are always screaming about doing away with democracy, and you just put someone as the nominee for president who hasn't had one vote cast for her in this cycle. Understand that argument as well. At the end of the day, this is what's happening. It is Trump versus Kamala Harris. And the interesting thing, and I said this a couple of podcasts ago, is that Biden was in a very difficult position because his approval rating is low. He was lagging behind in the polls, but behind him was Kamala Harris, the lowest rated vice president in modern history, lower than Dick Cheney, even after he shot someone in the face. So I thought that was a real problem, but I forgot that the mainstream media is absolutely terrible. If you are still getting all of your information from any of the mainstream media as your primary source, CNN, Fox News, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, if that's where you're getting all of your information from, you are misinformed.
Wow.
You just are. These are obvious propaganda arms, mostly of the left. Fox News historically kind of on the right, although I don't watch it. I've heard it's gone a little more left. It's wild, the refabricating of reality. You have then big tech, which often leans far to the left as well. And we saw in the last election cycle, selective curating of content, blocking content. And this shapes us because information puts us in formation. It forms our minds, it forms our opinions, it forms our thoughts, and it's really difficult to get good information. And if you want to be informed and really aware of what's going on in the world, all these things that affect you, you've got to fight for that information. Proverbs 14:15 says, "The inexperienced one believes anything, but the sensible one watches his step." The inexperienced one believes anything, but the sensible one watches his step. Proverbs 18:15 says, "The mind of the discerning acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks it." You see, these are active experiences. You are acquiring knowledge. You don't just sit and have knowledge downloaded into you that has all kinds of conflicts of interest and talking points. There's a lot of things that have been spun, and they've been spun so rapidly. And so we saw for 4 years where everyone, regardless of where you're at politically, if you were just being honest, you were watching Joe Biden decline. He's been in the public eye for 50 years. He was no longer the same guy, and it was getting worse over time, which is what happens with neurological cognitive decline, is it goes steadily and then it starts going quite rapidly. Everyone knew this. And the mainstream media would tell you that you were ageist and ableist and that you were completely crazy. And it's an overused term, but they would gaslight you to say there's nothing wrong until the debate, and they couldn't deny it anymore. And then they had to be honest for about 2 weeks. Well, the same people who lied to you about that the entire time are now starting to twist narratives on behalf of the Harris campaign. One of the biggest ones that they have gone full bore on is trying to protect her from her record on the border. Kamala Harris was put in charge of the border. I don't think this. I know this because Joe Biden did it, and he did it publicly multiple times. Here's one example.
I've asked her, the VP today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help us. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border.
So again, that's in 2021. And just to kind of mention it again, obviously, Joe Biden was already in decline there, and they told you, you're crazy. If you even question that, you're crazy. Well, the same people who said you're crazy for 4 years, if you question any level of senility with Joe Biden, now are saying you're crazy. I mean, you're just factually wrong if you say that Kamala was in charge of the border. And there was a term that was assigned to her. It's a stupid term. It's the border czar, C-Z-A-R. You didn't know this was a spelling show. Wow. C-Z-A-R, the border czar. The term czar is just the Russian term for Caesar, the Roman title of an emperor. It's a stupid name. We're Americans. We should have American names. We have the climate czar. That's how John Kerry has been referred throughout the whole administration, as the climate czar. Kamala has been referred to as the border czar through the whole administration. And now, over and over and over in lockstep, all the mainstream media came together to say Kamala was never the border czar. Here's the problem. We all have brains and we have the internet, and we can go back and find hundreds and actually even thousands of examples of the media referring to her as the border czar. If you're only listening to the podcast and you're not watching, come on over to youtube.com/Clayton, T-Y-N-E-R, Clayton Tyner, and check it out. But here is a compilation. And what it's showing is the same news agencies after Kamala became the nominee and before. And you will notice a slight difference in how they talked about her border responsibilities.
Quote unquote, border czar. Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
Now what she's up against is folks lying about her border record, calling her a border czar.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar.
The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar. They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration.
There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. You know, she was the border czar.
Calling her sort of the border czar, which wasn't necessarily the case.
So the border, if they weren't planning to address it in a major way, do not make her your border czar. She met with some of the Northern Triangle countries, but nothing has effectively changed.
So there it is, back and forth, back and forth. Today, as the nominee, she was never the border czar. The same media company, before she was the nominee, she's the border czar. She's in charge of the border. She's not doing a good job. They should stop talking about the border because she's the border czar. It's called gaslighting. If you don't know what the term references, it's an old movie where the husband every night is slowly turning down the gas that goes to the lamp in the hallway. And the wife will say, it feels darker in here. And he convinces her she's going crazy, that the light isn't getting lower. She's losing her mind. And she actually goes crazy. He's gaslighting her. That's what's happening when you know what you heard, you know what you saw, you know what you experienced, and they just all in one accord overwhelm you with the opposite, as if it is just now gospel and we must accept it. This is an issue on the left and on the right, where no one can admit on the right that the way Donald Trump talked about the election led to a lot of hard feelings. Now, he said on January 6th, go and peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard. I'm not saying there's a direct one-to-one and he's responsible therefore, but to act like he handled that entire transition well, we shouldn't have to do that. Even if you love Trump, you've got MAGA gear on. Love it for you. Great. We can also be honest that he was a known womanizer throughout his past. We can also be honest about some of these people's faults, and we should be able to. But we're so locked into echo chambers. And then the mainstream media has such overwhelming force and is now often partnered with big tech. And this goes back. And again, before I make this comparison, because I just know in the comments it's going to be like, oh, so the Democrats are the devil. It's like, no. Like all of it, right? Politicians in general, probably shouldn't be trusted. On the left and the right, there's a vested interest in making you think you didn't hear what you thought you heard. Well, that is like the first sin. The first temptation comes in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. And if you will remember how the temptation came, is very crafty. It says, now the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Is that what he really said? Making you question what you actually heard, making you rewrite history. I know oftentimes I'm like over in fantasy land of the world that I wish we could have. But the United States is a democracy, which means our government is run by us. It's supposed to represent us. And until we, as just the normal everyday citizens, are willing to make our voices heard and make our opinions heard and demand some kind of change where we can just have honest conversations, where instead of an entire multi-billion dollar apparatus of mainstream media coming in to project information into us that is false, we could just have an honest conversation of, okay, Kamala was a border czar and she didn't do a good job on the border. So what does that mean? And how does that affect who we're going to vote for? And we can have honest conversations about the 4 years that Donald Trump was president and about his quality of character and what he has shown and maybe how he's changed, or if you don't believe he's changed, we can just get it all out there, the good, bad, and the ugly, and then make informed decisions about how to move forward. I think part of the problem is there's something in the human condition that longs for the extreme. We embrace the bad news. You know, one of the first things they teach you in sales is people aren't going to buy to increase pleasure. They're going to buy to eliminate pain. And so if you want them to buy, you have to push on their pain points. That's all the mainstream media does. They don't sell you very much good news. Every once in a while, there's a really inspiring story and it kind of goes viral across the internet. But the vast majority of what is reported and just shoved down our throats day after day is bad news, because the fear hooks us and the fear sells and the fear draws us in. We see this when the Israelites in the Old Testament had finally made it to the promised land, and Moses sends in 12 spies. And the spies are there to scope out the land and bring back a report so they can put a battle plan together and go take what was rightfully theirs. It says the men went back to Moses, Aaron, and the entire Israelite community in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back a report for them and the whole community and showed them the fruit of the land. They reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us. It's flowing with milk and honey, and here's some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. And we also saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites are living in the land of the Negev. The Hethites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea. And the men who had gone up said, we can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are. They gave a negative report to the Israelites. They said, the land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great size. Bad news sells. Bad news gets people's attention. It riles them up and it causes them to make terrible decisions. If you're going to make informed decisions about the world you live in and the role that you play in it, you're going to have to fight. And this is really important for Christians as well. The stereotype is that Christians are, all on the right and they're all super conservative. It's not actually true. There are people who love God, who fall on both sides of the political aisle. I have my own political ideas, but part of fighting for great information is allowing yourself to live in a level of nuance. And if someone tries to convince you that the only way that you can exist in our politically polarized world is to demonize the other side, to protect your side at all costs, to gaslight and lie about your side, to project, then that is not the company that you should keep. We are called to be truthful, even when it's inconvenient. We should be truthful about what we see on the other side of the aisle, and we should be truthful about what we see on our own side of political ideas. And if we're willing to do that, then we can engage in the world. We can engage in politics without losing our witness. And that ultimately is what should be most important to followers of Jesus. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTyner.